So this is my Module 14 case study. So first thing is to summarise the case and establishing all the facts. So James was summoned to the office to talk about his third tardy for the week, and Mr. Inman received a call from the fifth period teacher saying that she saw James give David Ramos a package which he thought was drugs on his way to the office. So James gave the package to David in the hallway as he was walking to the office to see Mr. Inman, and David was quite nervous. At the meeting in the school office, there were Mr. Inman, James, David, and the school police officer present. When David was asked what happened, he did not reply. So the school police officer searched him, found the brass knuckles. However, James jumped in and admitted that the brass knuckles were his, and he said that he was going to beat up David if he didn't take them. The police officer handcuffed both boys and took them away. So after a phone call to the parents, James's mum said keep him locked up, and David's mum came to the school to talk with Mr. Inman and subsequently left to go to the youth detention facility. So that is just showing that the two different attitudes from the mums and a bit about the background of the boys. So to report any legal or ethical issues. So James has confessed to the brass knuckles, and he said they were his, and he threatened David into taking them. James understands the rules and he's complied with the school police officer. David was coerced into taking the brass knuckles under threat of violence. He has also been arrested on the felony offence, even though he was an unwilling participant in this violation. So David now faces criminal conviction and expulsion from school, even though he is a model student with no prior record. David was guilty of carrying a weapon on school grounds, which is a zero tolerance offence. However, one could argue that he really didn't have a choice. So it's a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Is there a policy in place where students are forced into something against their will? If so, does that override the weapons policy? That's just a thought I had. And a muscular, tattooed, violent 15-year-old coercing a small 13-year-old under threat of violence to hold a weapon for him, that David was powerless and he was unwilling in that situation. And James threatening David is a breach of school policy, and it could be constituted as bullying. So synthesize exactly what has happened in a single sentence. So just try to sum it all up. So James could be considered a well-known and infamous leader at his school who has coerced a student 2 years younger to hold and carry a weapon, which is against school policy. And now the younger student has been charged with carrying a weapon, which would result in his expulsion and also get him a criminal conviction against his name. So now we're synthesizing the facts. So on the left, I've got my known facts, and on the right, the unknown facts. So when it came to people involved, so James, David, Mr. Inman, the fifth period teacher, the school police officer, and their parents were involved in the initial situation, I suppose, or scenario. The unknown facts, there's nothing about the school principal. So it says Mr. Inman is an associate principal. In Australia, that is like a deputy principal. So I'm not sure if that's the same here, but I did have a question about is there a school principal, which is Mr. Inman's immediate boss. Unknown fact, so superintendent, nothing about that. So it didn't show that Mr. Inman reached out to anyone of his superiors in dealing with this. Were there any other students who witnessed the incident who could shed light on it? And then I actually thought a bit outside the box. Well, what about James's intended victim, why he was carrying the brass knuckles in the first place? And then I thought it said about both boys' mothers, but I'm wondering about James and David's fathers, if that has, there's no indication if they're on the scene or not. And then the place, so I've got the classroom, the school hallway, the office, and then after the scenario would be the detention centre, And then I put in there the south side of town because it seems like it has to do, it has something to do with the whole situation. I suppose the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak, can give you indication of what James is like or his upbringing. The unknown facts is, where is David from? Is he from the south side? Is he on the right side of the tracks? I'm not sure. And again, I was thinking, where was the fight going to take place? Why was James carrying the brass knuckles in the first place? Where was he before school? Is it a suburban or rural kind of area? Why wasn't James on the bus? Has that got anything to do with the situation? And what is going on at home? So the program, I just put the public school, James and David. I was assuming it was a public school. Honours program is David. The school musician is David. After school basketball is Mr. Inman and James. So Mr. Inman is spending his time after school trying to build a good rapport with James. And the DAEP regular is James. He's been there before. He's no stranger to this or to the consequence. The unknown facts, who James was going to fight and what the conflict was over. Does it have anything to do with the scenario? Well, I was kind of thinking outside the box. I was thinking, well, he's brought them to school. What's going on? There's no talk about that at all, I suppose, that I could see. Why didn't David say no and walk away? Did he have a choice? That's an unknown fact. Was he cornered and then coerced into taking the weapons? And why did James pick David? Was it just an opportunity that he was the one standing there and, he just thought, what I'm going to do with the weapons? I know I'll just harass this kid and give it to him. So review and prioritise the information. So this conflict could have an effect on students, teachers and parents. If there's a breach in policy, that could have Mr. Inman sacked. It could also open a can of worms for the district. So if Mr. Inman can do what he wants, what does that mean for the principals and associate principals in the district? Can they pick and choose what policies to follow? If nothing is done on behalf of David, his future could suffer. And Mr. Inman's decision could be life-changing for David, as he has never been in trouble before. So he's going from a model student with no mark against his name to the most extreme punishment available. And Mr. Inman's decision, if he does not do anything but accept the district's policy, could play on his mind, especially as it goes against his own moral compass. So again, we're reviewing and prioritising the information. So the players in this is, who it will affect is David and his family, James and his family, Mr. Inman, the school police officer, the principal, the school district, stakeholders, and the school community and students. So there is no indication that the school principal was notified. Mr. Inman should ask for a meeting with the district superintendent if he wants to advocate for David. This case study does not reveal if he asked for advice from peers or his direct boss. If Mr. Inman is going against the zero tolerance policy, he needs to let all stakeholders know the reasons why he's doing it and why it's in the best interest for David. And Mr. Inman also needs to let the boys' parents know what is going on. Reviewing and prioritising the information. Still, Mr. Inman can research the district's policies to see if a bullying or threatening offence can override the weapon offence. He could see if the zero policy is rationally sound or if it has any leeway depending on the situation, because this case scenario doesn't seem like it does at all. He could question both boys again to get a deeper understanding of exactly what happened. Mr. Inman could look at his legal and ethical obligations before coming to a decision. He could ask himself, what is right for David, James, me, and the rest of my students? He could look at district policies and the NELP standards to see if that could help guide his decision. And I've just got there the NELP standards 2.2, candidates understand ethical and legal decision making. So identify your options and possible consequences. If Mr. Inman does nothing, he will get an official reprimand from the district. If Mr. Inman could advocate for David by not signing the paperwork, asking for a school board meeting or a meeting with the superintendent to explain his views of what happened and what the outcome should be. And again, candidates demonstrate the capacity to evaluate ethical dimensions of issues, analyse decisions in terms of established ethical frameworks, or communicate about and advocate for ethical and legal decisions. So it's kind of going against the zero tolerance policy and, giving some power to the school leaders there. Mr. Inman can sign the paperwork on David and let the district's policies dictate what happens to David, which essentially means expulsion, schooling at the DAEP, and a criminal conviction. Mr. Inman could ask for a formal inquiry into the matter. It's another option. And Mr. Inman could also ask for advice from his boss or his peers of how he should handle the situation. As far as I could read, I didn't see any indication that he did. So evaluate your options. If Mr. Inman does nothing, he'll get an official reprimand from the district. So the pros is nothing happens to David. Cons, Mr. Inman will be written up. So it's like a win-lose situation. Mr. Inman could advocate for David by not signing the paperwork and asking the school board for a meeting or a meeting with the superintendent to explain why and his views of what happened and what he thinks the outcome should be. So the pros is David is expunged and Mr. Inman is not written up, which is a win-win. But the cons, it may fail and David will be expelled anyway, and Mr. Inman may still be written up for not following directions. Mr. Inman can sign the paperwork on David and let the district's policies dictate what happens to David, which essentially means expulsion, schooling at the DAP, and a criminal conviction. So the pros with that is Mr. Inman has followed protocol and he's not written up. And the cons is David is expelled and has a criminal charge against his name. Mr. Inman could ask for a formal inquiry into the matter. So if there's an inquiry, it may override the no tolerance policy. It may even make way for change within the district and David is expunged. The cons is his request may be denied. The inquiry, if it did go ahead, it may not go the way he thinks it's going to go, or it may go against him and David, so it might kind of backfire. And Mr. Inman could ask for advice from his boss or his peers of how he should handle the situation. So the pros is he may get an answer that solves the issues, but the cons is he may not get any help at all. Choosing the best option. I would weigh up the pros and cons of each of my choices, and my choice would be to advocate for David. As I think of ethics, and a sentence comes to mind for me that I use in my class all the time: is it fair and is it reasonable? I believe David is an unwilling victim in this scenario. He wanted no part of it, but under threat of violence from a much bigger kid who was known for bullying and fighting, he didn't really have a choice. So not all violations of policies are the same, so there needs to be leeway on the case-to-case basis. If not, problems like this are going to continue to occur. So zero tolerance policies take autonomy away from individual school leaders. They can cause a school leader to have internal conflict, and it is against their better judgment or personal code of ethics. So I just put here, candidates demonstrate the capacity to, 1, model ethical behaviour in their personal conduct, and relationships, and 2, cultivate ethical behaviour in others. So it's kind of about looking at your moral compass and seeing what you think is right, even though it's against the policy. Well, if we can get a meeting or something like that going on, or an inquiry, he's got a kind of fair chance from getting his point across. Choosing the best option. So I would ask for an inquiry into the situation, because I think David was bullied and coerced, and there needs to be an exemption within the no tolerance policy of weapons on school grounds, as this case has extenuating circumstances. It's not like he took them on choice or he wanted to do it anyway. He was like a lose-lose for David. So I would consult all stakeholders with my justifications of why I want this inquiry and the facts behind the matter. I believe holding an inquiry is akin to a court of law where all the information and facts are displayed